Viruses before life ever learned to breathe, before oceans turned blue, and long before the first creature crawled onto land, there existed an enemy. So small, so ancient, and so mysterious that even time itself remembers it as the first whisper of biological existence. This was not life, but it shaped the fate of every living thing that would one day walk, swim, fly, or breathe on Earth. Hello everyone, how are you? I hope you're doing well and ready for something extraordinary. Today, we are beginning one of the most powerful and mind-bending journeys into the origins of life. If you haven't already, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. And don't forget to comment below where you're watching from, because your support helps us create more epic documentaries like this. Now, let's begin. In the beginning, Earth was not a blue world. It was a battlefield of fire, stone, and storms. Volcanoes ruptured the surface endlessly. Meteors slammed into the baby planet like cosmic hammers. Lightning ripped the sky apart, boiling the seas that were just starting to form. And through all of this chaos, one force silently prepared to shape the destiny of the entire planet. A force too small to see, yet too powerful to ignore. Scientists believe that billions of years ago, somewhere within the churning oceans or on the hot mineral surfaces of ancient rocks, the earliest molecular systems began to interact. These were not organisms, no cells, no membranes, no structure, nothing that could be called alive. But they had one ability that would change everything. They could copy themselves. Imperfectly, slowly, chaotically, but they could replicate. And replication is the first step toward evolution. From this imperfect replication emerged the earliest molecular invaders, primitive viral ancestors. They were strands of genetic instruction wrapped in simple chemical coats. They could not live, they could not breathe, they could not eat, and yet they held the power to hijack other molecules, redirecting them to create more copies of themselves. This was the first whisper of biological strategy, the first example of molecular warfare, the earliest hint that Earth was moving toward life. These primordial viruses may have been the sparks that pushed early chemistry toward complexity. They forced the first protocells, simple bubbles of fat and minerals, to evolve defenses, membranes, and internal machinery. Without viruses, protocells might never have needed to improve, adapt, or innovate. But with them, evolution was ignited. As millions of years passed, the oceans cooled, and the first stable molecules formed networks. These networks became self-sustaining systems. Simple protocells drifted through the water, absorbing minerals, reacting to light, dividing, merging, surviving, and viruses followed them everywhere. The moment a protocell opened the smallest chemical doorway, a viral particle slipped inside, copying itself again and again until the protocell burst. This microscopic battle repeated across the oceans for ages. The sea, which looked calm from above, was in truth a silent war zone at the molecular level. Every protocell that survived became stronger. Every viral strand that mutated became smarter. The dance of survival had begun, and it was a dance that would never stop. Slowly, the accidental chemistry of Earth began to transform into the earliest biology. Molecules organized, systems stabilized, structures formed, but viruses were always there, lurking just beyond the edge of every new evolutionary step. When protocells became more complex, viruses evolved with them. When early life discovered new ways to grow, viruses discovered new ways to infect. For billions of years, they remained invisible engineers of evolution. Modern research even suggests that up to 8% of the human genome, my own DNA, comes from ancient viral infections that fused with our ancestors. That means viruses are not just attackers, they are architects of life. Without them, humans might not exist at all. But long before humans, long before dinosaurs, long before plants or oxygen, the battle between protocells and viruses shaped Earth's first biological landscape. These microscopic agents helped determine which molecular systems survived and which vanished forever. They set the rules of survival before life even knew what survival meant. The ancient oceans continued boiling under the heat of the young sun. Lightning continued striking the surface. Underwater vents spewed minerals into the sea. And through this dramatic and unforgiving environment, the evolutionary arms race continued. Protocells became stronger. Viral particles became sharper. Some viruses learned to hide within their hosts. Others learned to wait for generations before attacking. The complexity of life was being guided by something that wasn't alive itself. That is the paradox of viruses. They are not living creatures, yet they manipulate life more deeply than anything else on Earth. Over time, protocells stabilized into the earliest real cells. They formed membranes, genetic control centers, and metabolic cycles. True cellular life had finally begun. But viruses did not disappear. They had already woven themselves into the story of life forever. They became the shadows that followed every living thing, shaping evolution through constant pressure. This is why scientists today believe that viruses may be older than life itself. They are relics of a pre-biological world, leftovers of ancient chemistry, fragments of primordial genetic chaos that refused to vanish. Their existence is a reminder that life did not arrive peacefully. It emerged out of conflict, pressure, adaptation, and survival. As the oceans stabilized and the planet cooled, a new chapter in Earth's evolution was about to begin. The viral era was only the opening scene. Soon, the earliest cellular organisms would transform the world with a power that viruses could only influence but never control. The next transformation would be far bigger, a revolution that would turn Earth into a living world and paint the oceans and atmosphere with the first signs of biological change. But the viruses remained, watching silently, ready to strike whenever evolution paused, ready to push life forward again through pressure and disruption. They were the first architects of adaptation, the unseen engineers of complexity, the original biological challengers in a world still young and chaotic. And as life prepared to evolve further, the oceans waited for the next great leap, one that would change the chemical makeup of the entire planet. Sea plants, the oceans were still restless, boiling with volcanic heat and echoing with the distant rumble of underwater eruptions. Yet somewhere within this ancient darkness, a silent transformation had already begun. True cellular life had finally taken its first breathless steps. But it was fragile, vulnerable, and indistinguishable from the chaos around it. The world needed something more powerful, something that could rise above the endless struggle for survival and begin shaping the Earth into a home for future life. That force would come from the most unexpected architects, tiny, delicate, sun-driven entities that drifted like dust in the water. They were the earliest sea plants. They were not plants as we know them today. No leaves, no stems, no roots, no flowers. Instead, these were simple photosynthetic pioneers, cyanobacteria. microscopic organisms capable of performing the most revolutionary act in biological history. They could capture sunlight and store its power in chemical bonds. They could turn light into life, and in doing so, they would alter not only the oceans, but the atmosphere, the climate, and the destiny of every living thing yet to come. Before these early sea plants appeared, Earth's oceans were murky and toxic. Others built thicker cell walls to protect themselves from predators. Some developed pigments to capture different wavelengths of light. The oceans, once a barren chemical soup, transformed into a vibrant, living tapestry of color and movement. And with every passing era, oxygen levels rose higher. Eventually, the atmosphere reached a tipping point. The Great Oxygenation event began, a moment that would become one of the most dramatic environmental transformations in Earth's history. Oxygen, which had once been merely a byproduct, now became a global force. Without sea plants, there would be no fish, no amphibians, no reptiles, no birds, no mammals, no humans. They are the unsung heroes of evolution. As they photosynthesized, they pulled carbon dioxide from the water, helping regulate the planet's climate. But even more astonishing was their relationship with the atmosphere. As oxygen built up, it reached a new threshold, allowing the formation of the ozone layer. This thin shield of gas protected the planet from harmful ultraviolet radiation. Without it, life could never survive on land. It was the sea plants that built this shield, molecule by molecule, without ever knowing the future life forms that would depend on it. Over time, sea plants diversified into new forms: green algae, red algae, brown algae. They colonized shallow waters, deep seas, coral reefs, and even small tidal pools. Some formed towering kelp forests that swayed like underwater cities. Others became the ancestors of all modern plants that would one day conquer the land. Their story is not simply about survival. It is about transformation, resilience, and the quiet persistence that reshaped an entire planet. The world that viruses once battled in was gone. In its place rose a world filled with light, color, and chemical possibility. The oxygen-rich oceans sparkled. The blue sky stretched across the horizon, and the planet prepared for the next stage of biological evolution, one that would introduce breathing organisms, mobility, and the first true steps toward complex multicellular life. But deep below, the sea plants continued their silent work. Day after day, they performed the same ancient ritual, absorbing sunlight, releasing oxygen, and shaping the world without ever claiming credit. They were the architects of habitability, the engineers of life's future, and the guardians of Earth's earliest ecosystems. As oxygen levels climbed and stabilized, a new era was on the horizon, an era where life would become more than drifting cells or floating colonies. The oceans were ready to support larger, more dynamic organisms. Evolution was preparing its next masterpiece, and the world waited for the arrival of creatures that would breathe the oxygen gifted by the sea plants and use it to fuel unimaginable forms of life. Oxygen. Billions of years after the first sea plants began their quiet work, the world faced a transformation so profound that it would echo through every era of life yet to come. Oxygen, the most abundant and yet the most dangerous gas in the universe, began to accumulate in the Earth's oceans and atmosphere. At first, it was barely noticeably a whisper of change. Tiny pockets of oxygen appeared here and there, reacting with iron, rusting rocks, coloring ancient seas in hues of red and orange. To the naked eye, nothing seemed different, but at a molecular level, a revolution was underway. This was not a gentle revolution. Oxygen is both life-giver and life-taker. In high concentrations, it is corrosive, toxic even to the earliest anaerobic life forms that had thrived in a world without it. Entire populations of primitive microbes perished, unable to adapt to this new chemical reality. Some retreated into oxygen-free environments, hiding in the depths of sediments or near hydrothermal vents. Others evolved protective enzymes, discovering the first tools of survival in a changing chemical world. Natural selection intensified, and evolution accelerated in ways previously unimaginable. The accumulation of oxygen in the atmosphere, known today as the Great Oxidation Event, marked a turning point in Earth's history. This was the first time the planet's environment had been irreversibly altered by the biological activity of life itself. For the first time, life began to shape its own destiny. Oxygen was no longer a byproduct. It was a force capable of reshaping the biosphere. It oxidized methane, cooled the climate, and even created the foundation for the ozone layer that would protect life from harmful ultraviolet radiation. Earth was becoming habitable, not just by accident, but through a self-reinforcing feedback loop between life and the environment. Meanwhile, the oceans teemed with competition. Microbes that could tolerate oxygen thrived, exploiting the new energy available through aerobic respiration, a far more efficient process than the anaerobic metabolism that had dominated the early oceans. These organisms grew larger, divided faster, and formed the first complex cellular communities. Oxygen provided the spark for cellular innovation, enabling multicellular life to emerge. Without it, complex life animals, plants, eventually humans, would have been impossible. Oxygen also initiated a hidden arms race. Its toxicity drove the evolution of defense mechanisms. Early cells developed enzymes like catalase and superoxide dismutase, molecular shields against oxidative damage. Membranes became stronger, genetic material more protected. Every new adaptation triggered a counter-adaptation, a chemical chess game that unfolded across the oceans. Evolution had entered a new high-speed phase. Life was no longer content with mere survival. It was innovating, experimenting, and laying the foundation for future ecosystems of unimaginable diversity. On land, oxygen's influence was slower, but no less significant. The atmosphere gradually cleared. Sky and air changed color and composition, eventually allowing sunlight to penetrate more effectively and enabling the first colonization attempts by microscopic organisms at the water's edge. The presence of oxygen created a stable climate, a protective layer of ozone, and a reservoir of energy for future terrestrial life. Earth was gradually shifting from a hostile, volatile planet to one capable of supporting forests, amphibians, reptiles, and eventually humans. The interplay between oxygen and life also produced the first real cycles of energy and matter. Photosynthesis and respiration became intertwined, creating a global metabolic loop. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen began moving through ecosystems, setting the stage for larger, more complex organisms. Nutrient cycles, once random and chaotic, became organized systems that regulated growth, competition, and survival. Oxygen had become the invisible architect of life's next chapters. Yet oxygen's rise was not without its dangers. It destabilized existing ecosystems. Mass die-offs occurred, wiping out lineages that had thrived in an anaerobic world. These oxygen crises punctuated Earth's history, creating evolutionary bottlenecks that determined which species would survive and which would vanish. But out of crisis came innovation. Those that adapted to oxygen evolved more complex metabolisms, larger cells, and eventually cooperative communities. The stage was set for the evolution of multicellular organisms, including the first algae, the first seaweeds, and the earliest animal precursors. Over time, oxygen reached a tipping point where it could support the energy demands of larger motile organisms. The first predators emerged, tiny but lethal, feeding on slower, less adapted life forms. Life had evolved from passive drifting into active hunting and competition. Oxygen was no longer just a chemical. It was the lifeblood of biological strategy, powering movement, hunting, growth, and reproduction. Evolution had entered a new era, an era defined by energy, complexity, and interdependence. By the time oxygen saturated the atmosphere, the oceans had transformed into vibrant ecosystems, teeming with green algae, cyanobacteria, protozoans, and early multicellular organisms. Shallow seas sparkled with chemical diversity. Coral-like structures, mats, and microbial reefs provided niches for new species. Oxygen had turned Earth into a dynamic, living planet, preparing it for the rise of amphibians, reptiles, and the first land-bound creatures. It had created the invisible energy scaffolding upon which all future life would stand. And yet, even as oxygen enabled life's expansion, it remained a paradox. It was simultaneously a poison and a sustainer, a destroyer and a creator. Every breath, every metabolic reaction, every evolutionary leap would be tied to this gas. Life had become a delicate balancing act, negotiating survival in an oxygenated world, and the invisible hand of oxygen would continue to guide Earth's biological destiny for billions of years to come. The Blue Earth. Billions of years after the first sea plants began their photosynthetic revolution, Earth started to reveal a new face, one that would inspire awe in every species yet to emerge. The oceans, once dark and turbulent, began to shimmer with clarity. The atmosphere, once thick and suffocating, gradually became transparent. Sunlight, filtered through the newly oxygenated sky, reached the surface with unprecedented intensity. It was during this transformative period that Earth acquired its first striking visual identity. The hue that would become synonymous with life itself, the blue of oceans, the soft green of emerging life, and the sky stretching endlessly overhead. From orbit, the planet would have appeared as a marble suspended in the void, its water reflecting light, creating patterns of deep cobalt and turquoise. This was no coincidence. The physics of water, combined with the atmosphere and the scattering of sunlight, produced the spectacular cerulean shade that would later inspire civilizations to call it the Blue Planet. But this beauty was far from superficial. It had profound implications for life, climate, and evolution. The clarity of the oceans enabled the penetration of sunlight to greater depths than ever before. Photosynthetic organisms, already thriving near the surface, could now expand into deeper layers, forming vertical communities and establishing ecological niches. Algae and primitive seaweeds evolved, exploiting every available wavelength of light. The oceans became three-dimensional landscapes of energy, with light driving life's expansion downward as well as across. These depths, previously dark and lifeless, began hosting complex interactions, from microbial mats to the first multicellular assemblages. Oxygen, the silent architect, continued its work, saturating the water and enriching the environment for future generations of life. At the same time, the atmosphere began its own transformation. The thin layer of ozone formed by rising oxygen levels created the first shield against harmful ultraviolet radiation. This allowed life to venture closer to the water's edge without fear of destruction. Microbial mats and sea plants could colonize shallow regions where tides, currents, and light created dynamic and ever-changing habitats. These coastal zones became experimental arenas for evolutionary innovation. Life was learning not just to survive, but to manipulate its surroundings, exploiting the energy and shelter offered by the new planetary environment. The combination of clear skies, reflective oceans, and shallow coastal regions set the stage for one of Earth's most critical evolutionary leaps: the development of visual systems. The scattering of sunlight in water and air provided contrasts, colors, and brightness patterns that encouraged early organisms to detect differences in light and shadow. Primitive photoreceptors appeared, allowing some of the earliest mobile life forms to respond to light, avoid predators, and locate food. The very blueness of Earth had become a signal, a tool, and a resource for life. It was the first example of environmental feedback shaping sensory evolution. Underneath the ocean surface, chemical gradients stabilized, creating the first predictable habitats. Nutrients from hydrothermal vents combined with sunlight-driven energy in the upper layers, creating highly productive zones. Sea plants, along with microbial mats, formed the foundation of entire food webs. Tiny grazers, the earliest protozoans, evolved to feed on these primary producers, establishing the principle of energy transfer that would govern all future ecosystems. The oceans were no longer random mixtures of molecules and cells. They had become organized, hierarchical and dynamic systems capable of sustaining increasingly complex life. In essence, the appearance of the blue Earth was the first visible proof that life had transformed the planet. Oceans reflected sunlight, created energy gradients, and fostered the first complex ecosystems. The atmosphere, enriched with oxygen and filtered by ozone, allowed organisms to venture into new ecological realms. Life and the planet were now deeply intertwined, with each influencing the other in ways that would echo through billions of years. The stage was set for the next extraordinary leap. Life leaving the oceans and daring to breathe, move, and thrive on land. Amphibians, after billions of years of evolving in oceans enriched by oxygen and illuminated by the vibrant blue hue of Earth, life began preparing for its most daring experiment yet. The vast oceans, which had nurtured the first photosynthetic organisms, multicellular life, and increasingly complex ecosystems, were still the cradle of life. But the shorelines, where water met land, offered untapped potential. For the first time, certain organisms were poised to challenge the boundary between aquatic and terrestrial existence. These pioneers were the amphibians, the first creatures to breathe both water and air, to navigate two worlds simultaneously, and to take the first tentative steps toward life on land. The ancestors of amphibians were fish, but unlike their purely aquatic predecessors, they evolved strong, muscular fins that could support short excursions along muddy shores. Their gills, still functional underwater, allowed them to extract oxygen from water, while primitive lungs enabled them to breathe air. These dual respiratory systems were evolutionary marvels, providing versatility and a competitive advantage in an environment that was increasingly crowded and oxygen-rich. The amphibians were the first true bridge between the seas and the land. Shallow tidal pools, river deltas, and marshes became laboratories for experimentation. Water levels fluctuated, temperatures varied, and predators abounded both in water and on the shore. Amphibians evolved to navigate these challenges. They developed stronger skeletons, reinforced muscle structures, and more complex nervous systems capable of coordinating movement on land. Limbs with digits gradually emerged from the sturdy fins, granting mobility and the ability to push off solid surfaces. Each successful adaptation was a small victory over gravity, friction, and the perils of exposure. The oceans and shorelines were now a battleground for survival. Predation pressures in water selected for speed, agility, and sensory awareness, while exposure to the open air demanded resilience, protective skin, and behavioral intelligence. Amphibians mastered both realms. They were hunters and prey, explorers and survivors, innovators in locomotion and respiration. Life had crossed an invisible threshold, and the Earth would never be the same. Amphibians' skin played a vital role in this transition. Unlike fish scales, their permeable skin allowed for cutaneous respiration, absorbing oxygen directly from water or moist environments. This adaptation was critical for life in fluctuating habitats. It also demanded that amphibians remain near water sources, creating a strong ecological link between aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. Their very survival was tied to the balance between these two realms, making amphibians early indicators of environmental health long before humans understood such concepts. Reproduction also underwent profound change. Eggs, once deposited in water and left to develop passively, now required careful placement in moist environments. Embryos remained vulnerable to desiccation, predators, and temperature changes, driving the evolution of parental strategies and protective behaviors. Amphibians were among the first organisms to exhibit intricate interactions with their environment, shaping habitat selection, migration patterns, and population dynamics. The evolutionary pressure to survive outside pure aquatic environments was a catalyst for rapid innovation. The emergence of amphibians transformed food webs. Aquatic insects, tiny fish, and microbial colonies faced new predators capable of exploiting both land and water. Nutrient cycles expanded beyond the oceans as amphibians transported organic material between habitats, decomposing remains enriched soils, creating the conditions for future plant colonization. By exploring both water and land, amphibians inadvertently laid the foundation for terrestrial ecosystems, providing a bridge that would support the rise of reptiles, forests, and eventually mammals. Over millions of years, amphibians diversified into an array of forms. Some retained primarily aquatic lifestyles, perfecting swimming, camouflage, and underwater hunting. Others ventured further inland, developing limbs capable of sustained movement across uneven terrain. The first territorial behaviors emerged, signaling the dawn of competition beyond mere survival. Predation strategies evolved. Ambush hunting, stealth approaches, and coordinated attacks became part of the amphibian repertoire. Life was no longer passive, had become strategic, adaptive, and dynamic. Climate fluctuations, tidal changes, and seasonal variations exerted additional evolutionary pressure. Amphibians developed tolerance for different temperatures, the ability to estivate during dry periods, and behavioral adaptations to escape predation. Each generation experimented with survival strategies, passing successful traits to descendants. The amphibians' existence illustrated a critical principle. Life could not merely exist in one stable environment. It needed flexibility, innovation, and foresight. This principle would echo through every lineage that eventually walked, crawled, or flew on land. Amphibians also initiated symbiotic relationships that would define ecological systems for eons. Microbes, algae, and small invertebrates found niches on amphibian skin and within their habitats. These interactions facilitated nutrient cycling, chemical communication, and even defense mechanisms. Life was no longer an isolated struggle. It was an interconnected network where even a single species could influence the fate of entire ecosystems. Amphibians became the first stewards of this complex web, the first living creatures to navigate both water and land while shaping environmental dynamics. The success of amphibians marked a turning point in the history of Earth. Life had mastered gravity, oxygen-rich air, and the transition from liquid to solid habitats. From tidal pools to shallow rivers, amphibians expanded the frontiers of survival. They set the stage for the rise of reptiles, the colonization of vast landmasses, and the eventual emergence of complex terrestrial ecosystems. The Earth had transformed yet again from a blue, oxygen-rich planet dominated by microscopic organisms and sea plants, to a living world where creatures could move freely between water and land, carrying the promise of untold evolutionary potential. And as the first amphibians croaked, hunted, and explored the muddy shores of ancient continents, they carried with them the legacy of every organism that had come before, from viruses to sea plants to oxygen producers. The evolutionary thread that began in invisible molecular struggles now extended into the tangible, breathing world. Amphibians were not merely animals. They were living proof that life could transcend its original boundaries, conquer new environments, and lay the foundations for all the extraordinary forms yet to appear on Earth. Reptiles, millions of years after amphibians first braved the boundary between water and land. Evolution presented a new challenge and opportunity: complete independence from aquatic life. The land was a vast, untamed expanse, filled with sunlight, wind, and the constant threat of desiccation. Water was no longer ubiquitous. To survive, organisms had to develop new adaptations, stronger skins, more efficient respiratory systems, and eggs capable of enduring exposure to air. From the amphibians' tentative footsteps on muddy shores emerged the first reptiles, a lineage that would dominate the terrestrial world for millions of years and shape the course of Earth's history. The earliest reptiles were not the towering dinosaurs yet to come, but small, agile creatures. Their skin had evolved scales, reducing water loss and providing protection against the harsh sun. Internal fertilization and the development of amniotic eggs freed them from the need to return to water for reproduction, granting true independence. These adaptations were revolutionary. Reptiles could explore arid lands, forests, and rocky terrains previously inaccessible to amphibians. They had become fully terrestrial organisms, capable of moving across continents and exploiting niches that were now open for the taking. Reptiles' senses also evolved dramatically. Vision adapted to detect movement in bright daylight. Hearing became sharper to locate prey or avoid predators. And olfactory systems developed to track chemical trails. Hunting strategies became sophisticated. no longer limited to ambushing in shallow water or near shorelines. Reptiles could stalk, chase, and strike on land. This era marked the emergence of the first active predators, capable of dominating ecosystems with skill, speed, and strategy. Predation itself became a driving force of evolution. The first land predators emerged from reptilian lineages, preying on amphibians and smaller terrestrial organisms. These creatures, muscular and resilient, exhibited behaviors that indicated intelligence, timing, and coordination. Hunting was no longer a matter of chance, it was a complex interaction of environment, physiology, and instinct. With predation came natural selection of unparalleled intensity. Prey species evolved armor, camouflage, and defensive behaviors, while predators refined their speed, vision, and tactics. Life had entered a new phase, a biological arms race unfolding across continents. The terrestrial environment also demanded innovations in thermoregulation. Unlike aquatic habitats, land temperatures fluctuated dramatically between day and night and between seasons. Reptiles developed behavioral adaptations, basking in sunlight to raise body temperature, seeking shade or burrows to avoid overheating, and timing activity to match environmental conditions. Their metabolic systems evolved to function efficiently in variable conditions, allowing reptiles to colonize deserts, forests, and open plains. Survival was no longer merely about finding food and avoiding predators. It required mastery over the environment itself. Reproduction transformed life on land. The amniotic egg was a marvel of evolutionary engineering, self-contained ecosystem, providing oxygen, nutrients, and protection to the developing embryo. These eggs could be laid in diverse habitats, under leaves, in sand, or hidden among rocks. Life no longer needed water for continuity. Reptiles became architects of their own evolutionary destiny, independent of aquatic cycles. This independence allowed them to spread across continents, diversifying into countless species and ecological roles. Reptiles also catalyzed major changes in ecosystems. They influenced food webs by introducing new predatory pressures, altering the population dynamics of amphibians, insects, and smaller organisms. Their burrowing and nesting activities transformed soils, redistributed nutrients, and created microhabitats for other life forms. Reptiles were no longer passive participants. They were active engineers of ecosystems, reshaping landscapes and driving evolutionary innovation across multiple species. Among reptiles, some lineages began to dominate their habitats, evolving into apex predators. These early land hunters combined agility, strength, and cunning. Their arrival marked the first real terrestrial biological war, a struggle for supremacy that would determine which species would thrive and which would vanish. Entire ecosystems were reorganized as predators hunted prey, prey adapted, and competition intensified. This was life at its most dynamic, raw, and unyielding, a relentless interplay of survival, predation, and adaptation. Reptiles' emergence also affected the climate and vegetation. By moving across the land and consuming plants and other organisms, they influenced the growth of early forests, the dispersal of seeds, and the cycling of nutrients. They were catalysts for the transformation of barren or semi-arid regions into dynamic, living landscapes. Every movement, every hunt, and every breeding season contributed to a network of interactions that would support the rise of future terrestrial ecosystems. Through millions of years, Reptiles diversified into myriad forms: small, nimble hunters, heavily armored herbivores, burrowing species, and the precursors to giant lineages that would dominate the planet for hundreds of millions of years. Their success was a testament to adaptability, resilience, and the power of life to innovate in response to new challenges. Reptiles demonstrated that life could leave its aquatic origins behind entirely, conquer land, and establish dominance over entire continents. The story of reptiles is more than a tale of survival. It is a story of transformation, ambition, and relentless evolutionary experimentation. They turned the land into a stage for complex interactions, predation, and ecological engineering. They were the first creatures to truly master the terrestrial world, to claim it with confidence, and to initiate a chain of events that would shape the rise of forests, the evolution of new species, and eventually the rise of amphibians, successors, mammals, and humans, first land creatures, as the Earth matured into a vibrant, oxygen-rich planet dominated by forests, rivers, and vast stretches of land. Life prepared for yet another remarkable leap: the emergence of the first fully terrestrial creatures. Amphibians had already paved the way, navigating the margins of land and water, but now a new wave of evolution demanded complete independence from aquatic environments. These pioneering organisms would shape the terrestrial biosphere, colonize untamed landscapes, and ignite evolutionary innovations that would echo through the ages. The first land creatures were small, agile, and remarkably adaptable. They evolved structural adaptations that allowed them to move freely across solid surfaces, from dense forest floors to rocky highlands. Limbs became stronger, joints more flexible, and musculature more precise. Their sensory systems, sight, smell, and hearing, were refined to detect prey, predators, and mates in complex three-dimensional habitats. Survival on land required not only physical adaptation, but also behavioral intelligence. As creatures navigated variable terrain, fluctuating temperatures, and the unpredictable availability of food and water. One of the most significant innovations of these early terrestrial pioneers was the development of protective skin. Unlike amphibians, which relied on moisture-rich environments, these creatures evolved tougher, keratinized skin capable of reducing water loss and withstanding exposure to sunlight and wind. This breakthrough allowed them to colonize drier habitats, extending life into regions that were previously inhospitable. The conquest of arid and semi-arid land marked a turning point in Earth's history, as life was no longer constrained by proximity to water. The first land creatures also developed more advanced respiratory systems. Lungs became increasingly efficient, supporting sustained activity and higher metabolic rates. This enabled the pursuit of prey, extended migration, and long-term survival in diverse environments. Oxygen-rich air, combined with enhanced lungs and circulatory systems, provided the energy needed for faster, stronger, and more complex organisms to thrive on land. With mobility and respiratory efficiency came innovation in feeding strategies. Herbivores grazed on newly colonized plants, shaping the early terrestrial flora and influencing nutrient cycles. Carnivores, in turn, hunted these herbivores, initiating complex predator-prey dynamics on land. This interplay created the first fully terrestrial food webs, with energy transfer extending across multiple levels of interaction. Life was no longer a simple sequence of survival. It was a dynamic network of interdependent species, each shaping the evolution of the other. reproduction evolved to meet the challenges of life away from water. Amniotic eggs, previously perfected by reptiles, became the standard. These eggs contained all the nutrients and protection necessary for development, eliminating the need for aquatic environments and freeing life to expand into virtually any habitat. Nesting behaviors emerged, including concealment, territorial defense, and sometimes group nesting, adding layers of complexity to early land ecosystems. Reproductive success now depended not only on survival skills, but also on environmental awareness and strategic placement of offspring. As these first land creatures spread across continents, they encountered a variety of new challenges. Predation pressures intensified, driving the evolution of defensive adaptations. Camouflage, spines, shells, and rapid escape behaviors became common. Environmental variability, from temperature swings to storms and seasonal droughts, selected for resilience and flexibility. Early terrestrial organisms learned to exploit microhabitats, burrows, and canopy structures, laying the groundwork for the incredible diversity of life forms that would follow. The colonization of land had profound impacts on ecosystems. Soil formation was accelerated by burrowing and feeding activities, while nutrient cycling improved as organisms transported organic matter across habitats. Plant-animal interactions became more sophisticated, with herbivory driving plant evolution, while plants, in turn, developed defenses such as tougher leaves, toxins, and structural barriers. These reciprocal adaptations fueled an evolutionary feedback loop, accelerating diversity and complexity in both flora and fauna. Movement on land also stimulated new behavioral adaptations. Social behaviors, territoriality, communication, and even primitive forms of cooperation emerged. Early land creatures not only interacted with the physical environment, but also began to shape each other's survival strategies. In many ways, the first land-dwelling organisms were architects of ecological communities, engineers of landscapes, and pioneers of behaviors that would resonate through millions of years. As these creatures diversified, ecosystems became increasingly layered. Forests and grasslands were interspersed with wetlands and deserts, creating niches for an array of specialized life forms. Predator-prey dynamics stabilized into cycles, food chains became intricate, and energy flows reached new levels of sophistication. The first land creatures were the unsung heroes of this transformation, bridging the gap between aquatic origins and the complex terrestrial worlds that would follow. Ultimately, the rise of the first land creatures marked a fundamental shift in Earth's history. Life had mastered the transition from water to land, harnessed oxygen for sustained energy, and evolved structures and behaviors necessary for survival in harsh, variable, and dynamic terrestrial environments. The stage was set for even greater evolutionary leaps. The rise of apex predators, forests teeming with life, and the intricate interconnections of ecosystems that define Earth today. These pioneers laid the foundation for all future terrestrial life, ensuring that land would never again be a barren frontier. First predator, as the first land creatures spread across ancient continents, life faced a new challenge, one that would redefine survival itself. Up to this point, organisms had largely been grazers, scavengers, or passive hunters. But evolution demanded the emergence of a predator capable of seeking, capturing, and killing other creatures to sustain itself. This marked the birth of the first terrestrial predator, an apex force whose presence would alter ecosystems, trigger evolutionary arms races, and shape the course of life on land forever. The first predator was a remarkable organism, perfectly adapted for the deadly art of hunting. It possessed muscular limbs that allowed bursts of speed and precise pouncing. Its jaws were lined with sharp, serrated teeth, designed to tear flesh efficiently. Eyes capable of acute depth perception and movement tracking gave it a predatory advantage over nearly every prey species. This creature did not rely on chance. It employed strategy, patience, and timing, hunting with intelligence rather than instinct alone. Life had entered a new era, one defined by active pursuit, lethal efficiency, and the unrelenting pressure of predation. Ecosystems transformed almost immediately. Herbivores and smaller omnivores that once thrived freely on land now faced an unprecedented threat. Natural selection intensified, favoring those that could evade, hide, or defend themselves. Camouflage, speed, burrowing, and social behaviors emerged as survival mechanisms. Evolution accelerated as every hunting success of the predator became a selective force shaping the bodies, minds, and behaviors of prey species. The predator had become the invisible architect of ecological balance, driving innovation and diversity in the organisms it pursued. The first predator's hunting techniques were as diverse as its adaptations. Ambush strategies allowed it to lie in wait among foliage, striking only when prey ventured too close. Stalking strategies relied on stealth and patience, enabling it to close distances without detection. Speed-based pursuits leveraged muscular strength and endurance, exhausting prey before the final strike. These strategies were not instinctual reflexes, they were refined behaviors, honed through trial, error, and environmental feedback. The predator's presence created a continuous pressure on prey populations, ensuring that only the most adaptable survived. Reproductive strategies also mirrored predatory efficiency. Some predators developed territorial instincts, protecting hunting grounds to maximize resource access. Nesting and parental care evolved to ensure offspring survival, as young predators required extended learning to master hunting skills. The predator's life was a constant lesson in adaptation, strategy, and energy optimization, setting a precedent for all future carnivorous lineages. Life on land had entered a phase of specialization and competition unparalleled in the history of Earth. The first predator also drove diversification across habitats. Prey species evolved to exploit every possible niche, from dense forests to rocky outcrops, from open plains to burrows hidden beneath soil. In turn, predators evolved specialized adaptations to track and capture prey in these varied environments. Limbs, claws, sensory organs, and digestive systems became finely tuned instruments, each responding to selective pressures imposed by the ecological dance between hunter and hunted. This dynamic interplay created increasingly complex food webs, with energy flowing efficiently across multiple levels. Beyond physical adaptations, this predator instilled behavioral complexity. Coordinated hunting, territorial signaling, and learned avoidance strategies emerged among both predator and prey. Social interactions, dominance hierarchies, and cooperative behaviors appeared, setting the stage for future group dynamics in reptiles, mammals, and birds. Life was no longer simply a sequence of survival actions it had evolved into a network of interactions, dependencies, and strategies. The first predator had introduced the concept of ecological intelligence. The impact of this apex predator extended beyond immediate prey. Nutrient cycles accelerated as predation redistributed organic matter across the land. Decomposers processed remains, enriching soils and supporting plant growth. Seeds were dispersed more effectively through predation interactions. The predator had become a keystone species, indirectly shaping vegetation, microhabitats, and even climate interactions. Life's interconnectedness intensified, with the predator at the center of evolutionary innovation. The first predator's dominance was not absolute, however. Its success provoked counter-adaptations. Defensive strategies, flourished armor, spikes, toxins, and rapid escape behaviors evolved in prey. Some species developed cooperative group defense or warning signals, establishing early forms of communication. Predation created evolutionary pressure that rippled across multiple species, increasing biodiversity and resilience within ecosystems. Life had entered a delicate balance, where predator and prey co-evolved in a continuous, high-stakes dance. As millennia passed, this initial predator lineage diversified into multiple forms. Some became large, dominant hunters with powerful physiques and keen senses. Others specialized in stealth or speed, exploiting specific prey species. The evolutionary arms race intensified with each generation, producing innovations in morphology, intelligence, and survival strategies. By establishing the rules of predation, the first predator defined the structure and function of terrestrial ecosystems, influencing life's trajectory for millions of years to come. Ultimately, the emergence of the first predator transformed Earth. Life on land was no longer a passive existence. It had become dynamic, competitive, and complex. The predator drove adaptation, accelerated evolution, and fostered ecological interdependence. It was the first harbinger of the biological wars, the relentless struggle that would shape every forest, river, and plain. Without this apex predator, terrestrial ecosystems would have remained simple, static, and vulnerable. Its arrival was the dawn of an evolutionary revolution. First, biological war. As reptiles and the first land predators consolidated their dominion over Earth, life entered a new and unprecedented era, the first true biological war. Unlike simple predation, this conflict involved multiple species simultaneously, with survival depending not only on individual skill, but also on strategic adaptation, resource control, and the ability to exploit environmental conditions. Entire ecosystems became theaters of struggle, where predator and prey, herbivore and carnivore, competed for territory, food, and reproductive success. It was a war waged silently across forests, plains, and wetlands, shaping the evolutionary fate of Earth's inhabitants. This first biological war was driven by scarcity and opportunity. Food resources were finite, water sources fluctuated, and shelter was limited. Early predators, adept at hunting amphibians and other land creatures, faced competition not only from one another, but also from species that had evolved parallel strategies. Territorial disputes arose, with dominant predators establishing hunting grounds and challenging intruders through displays, intimidation, and occasionally violent confrontations. The landscape became a mosaic of contested regions where dominance and survival were inseparable. The prey species, facing these relentless pressures, evolved equally sophisticated adaptations. Camouflage became essential, allowing organisms to blend seamlessly with foliage, rocks, and soil. Burrowing behaviors proliferated, creating hidden retreats from predators. Flight, in the form of gliding or leaping, evolved in certain lineages as an escape mechanism. Chemical defenses emerged. Toxins, foul-tasting secretions, and irritating sprays deterred attackers. Evolution accelerated dramatically, driven by the imperative to survive in a world dominated by conflict. Competition extended beyond immediate predator-prey interactions. Herbivores competed for access to nutritious plants, while omnivores and smaller predators struggled to find insects, small vertebrates, or carrion. Reproductive success became a battleground. Mating displays, territorial claims, and nesting strategies were refined to increase the likelihood of offspring survival. Selection pressures were no longer limited to raw physical ability. They included intelligence, strategy, and the capacity for innovation. Life on land had transformed into a complex network of interactions, where each species' success depended on outmaneuvering countless others. Environmental pressures intensified the conflict. Seasonal droughts forced organisms to concentrate around shrinking water sources, leading to overcrowding, competition, and clashes between species. Forest fires, storms, and shifting riverbeds created dynamic and unpredictable conditions. Organisms that could rapidly adapt to these changes gained a decisive advantage, while less flexible species faced extinction. The first biological war was as much about resilience and adaptability as it was about predation or combat. Survival demanded constant learning, assessment, and strategic behavior. The predator-prey dynamics became increasingly intricate. Apex predators coordinated hunts, sometimes indirectly through territorial signaling or scent marking, establishing dominance without direct conflict. Prey species evolved vigilance, herd behavior, and synchronized movements to confuse and evade hunters. These interactions were early examples of complex ecological intelligence, where life responded not only to immediate threats but also anticipated future challenges. Evolution had become proactive rather than reactive. Niches diversified rapidly during this period. Specialized hunters emerged, ambush predators, speed-based chasers, nocturnal stalkers, exploiting specific prey or environmental conditions. Similarly, prey species evolved corresponding defenses, armor, spikes, camouflage patterns, burrows, and chemical deterrents. The interplay of offense and defense created escalating cycles of adaptation, a precursor to the evolutionary arms races that would define life on Earth for hundreds of millions of years. The first biological war was a crucible, forging resilience, ingenuity, and specialization across entire ecosystems. Reproductive strategies further reflected the pressures of conflict. Species that could protect nests, hide young, or relocate offspring to safer areas achieved higher survival rates. Parental care emerged in some lineages, increasing juvenile survival in environments filled with predators and competitors. Social structures, cooperative behaviors, and early forms of communication began to appear, laying the groundwork for complex behavioral evolution. Survival was no longer an individual endeavor, involved interaction, collaboration, and sometimes sacrifice within species. The cumulative effect of this first biological war was profound. Life on land became more diverse, resilient, and specialized. Ecosystems developed stratification, with species occupying precise niches and interactions influencing population dynamics. Food webs grew in complexity, connecting organisms through intricate networks of dependence and adaptation. The Earth had moved beyond simple life cycles. It had entered a phase of dynamic, interconnected evolutionary warfare, where each success and failure left an indelible mark on the trajectory of life. Ultimately, the first biological war exemplified the relentless power of natural selection. Predators refined their hunting skills, prey developed defense mechanisms, and entire ecosystems evolved in response to continuous pressure. The consequences of these early conflicts echoed across millions of years, influencing the rise of reptiles, amphibians, early mammals, and later species that would dominate terrestrial habitats. Life had proven its capacity for adaptation, strategy, and resilience in the face of relentless environmental and interspecies pressures. This was the crucible in which the diversity and complexity of terrestrial life were forged, setting the stage for forests teeming with life, predator-prey hierarchies, and the intricate balance of Earth's ecosystems. Forests, with the first biological wars shaping the dynamics of life on land. Earth was poised for its most spectacular transformation, yet the emergence of forests, these sprawling, dense ecosystems, became the living cathedrals of the planet, teeming with life, complexity, and interdependence. Forests were more than mere collections of trees. They were ecosystems, evolutionary laboratories, and arenas where life's ingenuity could flourish in unprecedented ways. The Earth, once a mosaic of scattered plants and pioneering animals, now experienced a surge in biodiversity that would define terrestrial life for millions of years. The rise of forests began with plants that had mastered the transition from water-dependent life to fully terrestrial existence. Early vascular plants, with roots capable of drawing nutrients from soil and stems, able to transport water and food efficiently, spread across continents. They formed dense canopies that transformed light, temperature, and humidity on the forest floor, creating microhabitats that nurtured countless species. These towering pioneers altered the physical landscape. Roots stabilized soil, leaves intercepted rainfall, and fallen detritus enriched the ground. Life, in turn, responded to this changing environment, giving rise to a multitude of organisms that would inhabit every layer of the forest. Among the first land animals, reptiles and amphibians adapted to this lush environment with remarkable innovation. Arboreal adaptations appeared, claws capable of gripping bark, tails for balance, and limbs specialized for climbing. Hunting and foraging strategies evolved to exploit the vertical complexity of forests. Predators stalked both ground and canopy, while prey developed camouflage and intricate escape behaviors to survive in multidimensional spaces. The predator-prey dynamics, once confined to flat terrains, now became three-dimensional, adding complexity to evolutionary pressures and promoting the diversification of species. Forests also created novel ecological networks. Herbivores began consuming vast quantities of vegetation, influencing plant morphology, reproduction, and dispersal. Plants evolved seeds that could be carried by wind, water, or animals, while defensive adaptations, thorns, toxins, tough leaves emerged in response to browsing pressure. Decomposers, from fungi to insects, accelerated nutrient cycling, breaking down organic matter and returning life-giving elements to the soil. The interactions between producers, consumers, and decomposers became increasingly sophisticated, reflecting a balance between competition, cooperation, and ecological interdependence. Microclimates within forests further enhanced biodiversity. Dense canopies created shaded, humid environments at ground level, while gaps in the foliage allowed sunlight to nourish fast-growing plants. Rivers, streams, and wetlands threaded through these woodlands, providing water and resources to a multitude of species. Each layer of the forest, from root systems to canopy tops, hosted specialized life forms, contributing to an intricate, interwoven tapestry of existence. Forests were no longer mere landscapes. They were living, breathing entities, continuously shaped by the life they harbored. The emergence of forests also accelerated behavioral evolution. Animals developed communication systems to navigate dense vegetation, alert group members to predators, and coordinate hunting or foraging. Territoriality became more defined as spatial complexity demanded new strategies for claiming and defending resources. Parental care, social hierarchies, and cooperative behaviors flourished, especially among species that required learning or protection to survive. Forests, in essence, became arenas for both physical and cognitive adaptation. Climate regulation was another transformative aspect. Forests influenced local and global weather patterns by regulating humidity, temperature, and even carbon dioxide levels. By storing carbon, influencing rainfall, and stabilizing soils. Forests played a critical role in shaping Earth's climate. Life itself, plants, animals, fungi, and microbes, became architects of a planetary system, demonstrating the interconnectedness of all species and their environment. The evolutionary arms race continued within forests. Predators refined hunting techniques to navigate complex foliage, while prey evolved extraordinary camouflage, mimicry, and escape behaviors. Arboreal species leaped from branch to branch, glided between trees, and developed acute senses to survive in a multi-layered habitat. Evolutionary innovation reached new heights, producing diversity and specialization previously unimaginable. The forest was a crucible of life, fostering complexity, adaptation, and interdependence on a grand scale. Ultimately, forests represented the culmination of billions of years of evolution, from viruses to sea plants, amphibians, reptiles, and the first land creatures. Life had now created intricate ecosystems capable of sustaining staggering biodiversity. Forests were living testaments to the resilience, ingenuity, and adaptability of life. They showcased the results of competition, predation, cooperation, evolution, and innovation, a panorama of evolution rendered tangible in the green expanses of Earth's surface. As forests flourished, they provided the stage for all future life forms, from towering reptiles to early mammals, insects, birds, and eventually humanity. Each tree, root, and leaf became a hub of interaction, survival, and growth. The Earth had transformed from a blue oceanic planet to a richly forested world, teeming with life and opportunity. Forests were the living legacy of the evolutionary journey that had begun in the oceans billions of years ago. Hello, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this incredible journey through the history of life on Earth. If you found this documentary fascinating, make sure to like, subscribe, and share so you don't miss any of our future videos. Comment below your thoughts or your favorite part of the journey. We love hearing from you and engaging with our curious audience. Disclaimer: this documentary is based on scientific research, historical evidence, and evolutionary studies. All content is intended for educational and informational purposes only. Interpretations, reconstructions, and visualizations are presented to illustrate concepts and theories in a cinematic format. Thank you for joining us on this epic exploration of life's journey from microscopic beginnings to the rise of forests. Remember, the story of Earth is still unfolding, and every discovery brings us closer to understanding the incredible complexity of life. Stay curious, stay inspired, and keep exploring.